Edward Wong Howe Pepelu Tervuski the Fourth.
Can you believe that we had to wait this long to meet this human being?
Episode 9.
It's unbelievable.
Jamming with Edward.
Yeah. Yeah, for real. Just what a load.
Yeah, let's do the first 3 episodes. Let's get everyone involved. Let's do a 4th. Let's do a 5th and like
5th one. Get into the backstory.
Set up one of their main arcs. Let's do a 6th one.
Yeah.
Another bottle episode 7, 8. Now. 9.
Yeah. Right, because Ein becomes more of a character because of Edward, which is a thing that I'm sure we'll talk about at times in this.
Because they're both animals.
Yes, exactly right. They are both animals. That is a thing, which the next episode we're going to talk about makes clear immediately, and I love.
Yes.
Yeah, Edward. Man, what a shift in tone Edward brings to this show, and I love it.
My favorite.
Yeah.
I love that at the end of like Edward Wong Howe Pepelu Tervuski the Fourth.
Yeah.
Ed made it up, you know.
Of course. No.
Ed is a troll. I love Ed. Ed is my favorite.
Yeah, of course. Ed is great.
Well, we're going to talk about the real charisma and the real that she brings.
Yeah.
And then also what just a pleasant voice to be on Bebop to make for comedy.
I agree. I wrote down after watching the episode the question, why Edward? And then I had some answers. Like this time around, I'm like, oh, these are the answers, I think, for why Edward.
Good.
Yeah, just because, like, I think it's notable before we even get into this, the live action version of the show cut Edward.
I mean,
they just
she's there. She's there. She's a character.
But not in like not
fridged her.
Yes. Like they really didn't do Edward in the way.
Yeah.
And that's a big decision, I would argue.
It's a big decision. I say the wrong one. Without further ado, let's get it started off. You are listening to See You Space Podboys.
Yep.
We are on episode 9, Jamming with Edward. I'm Abe Epperson.
I'm Adam Ganser. We're flying through this, Abe.
Yeah, we are. I mean, there's only 26 of these. Yeah, like
just
Swordfish
searing the sky.
2.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, you're listening to Yuck Yucks, a self-proclaimed Jet, and a self-proclaimed Edward.
So now that I watched Edward, I'd like to go and revisit a little bit of that at the end of the episode.
I'm an Edward.
Yeah.
No,
because I think you're also a little bit of a fae.
I'm super sexy.
Well, 100%. I love you in the outfit that you're wearing. But even aside from that, no, like personality wise, you're a little bit of a fae.
A little bit.
Yeah, you're right between them. Right.
We'll talk ad nauseum for the next 20 episodes or so.
Of course.
Let's jump right in because we're on a time schedule.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
Because we like to keep this nice and lean, just like the series itself. We talk about Cowboy Bebop. That's right. Let's start with a synopsis of this episode real quick, or within 20 minutes, in a segment we call What Planet Is This?
And the answer is Earth. It's Earth this time.
Earth is the answer this time.
But honestly, that's important because it's one of the biggest pieces of it's not explored as lore much. This is one of the biggest episodes where we learn what happened to Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, with the moon exploded in a hyperlink or a hyper when they were setting up the gate. Yeah. And that happened decades ago.
Which we saw in episode 6 with the young boy who never died.
Yes. Yes. And as we learn from multiple different voices in this episode, nothing good comes from Earth. That's how the solar system considers Earth. Earth is this old piece of shit that no one lives on anymore, and it's desolate. And this is where Edward's from. So basically, we're set up by this with we open up. It's a shot of like the Howl Eye from 2001: Space Odyssey.
Clear homage.
it's a artificial intelligence that's like, I'm so alone, I fucking hate it, and there's other satellites in orbit near it, but it isn't to the same level of AI that this artificial intelligence. It's also kind of off the grid. It's so alone, it has no one to talk to, much like Ed will learn. And it just starts to fire lasers at Earth, and we realize that what it's doing is it's printing carvings a la like the Nazca lines.
Yeah.
The Nazca animals found in Southern America, or South America. And it's these carvings are like etched into the countryside of the Earth. And Edward is laying, basically listening to the radio, listening for when rock showers are going to occur, which we learn are just a very... like a thing that happens because the moon blew up. And because the moon blew up, there's just stuff, that debris that drops on the Earth constantly throughout the day.
It's surprising that Earth is habitable at all.
It's not really.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not.
Edward lives in rubble. I mean, there are people there, but she lives in rubble. Like, there's no homes and stuff.
Also, you can see that a lot of the culture, a lot of the communities are actually underground or in these superstructures, because they have to hide away from basically the moon.
It's kind of the opposite of what you'd think space exploration would be, where if you left Earth and went to Mars or some of these other planets, you'd live in these superstructures like that because of the harsh elements.
Yeah.
And this franchise sort of gave us a narrative twist where, no, it's the Earth that's now the hostile environment. It's fun.
Again, all this is unsaid.
Yeah.
It's just visuals.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is what Cowboy Bebop, excels at. So we learn that she's a hacker, and she's hacking these Earthgate servers where she finds the Bebop, and we learn basically through the episode that she's been following the Bebop for a long time now. She's isolated, and she's like, I want that one.
She's a fangirl, basically.
She's a fangirl.
Yeah.
And she's very excited. She yells happily about, oh, Bebop, Bebop. And just then a rock shower. She explodes, tosses her and her equipment into the air.
Yeah.
Very good. So basically we cut to on the Bebop where everyone is doing their own thing, and you can see by the shots, like everyone's framed different. Everyone's in their own world, working on or washing their ship, or filing her nails, or pruning once again the bonsai tree. And on the TV, the news anchor explains that there's a bounty that has been placed by the Earth government on whoever's responsible for hacking these orbital satellites and creating these land carvings. And there's a psychic on the television who is
incredible.
Who talks like this, and
it's a real Igor.
It claims that the carvings are works of aliens and they're part of a conspiracy.
Man. Trying to unmask it all.
And Spike basically is like, a hacker? I don't want to do this bounty at all.
Yeah.
Hackers are boring as fuck. Probably because they aren't dangerous.
Exactly. Well, we know that because of what gets him excited about
what gets him excited into the episode. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
But it's 8 million, so like Jet and Faye are like, then we'll just split it 50-50, us. And he's like, all right. Even though, they still rib at each other. We're still in that brother-sister kind of union. Jet's like making fun of women, and Faye, like kicks him basically. But they're going to have a team up.
Jet has two fairly misogynistic lines.
Yeah.
They're not good. But the more you get of Jet's backstory, you're like, oh, okay, this is not just like dumb frat boy shit. Like there's some actual hurt that he's elocuting very carefully here. Anyway, that doesn't justify it, but
doesn't justify it. It's just
that's what's happening though.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
We cut back to Ed, and Ed is basically trying to summon the Bebop, is what we're going to learn retroactively here, by fucking with the police, which I love Edward. what's the first thing that they do? They fuck with the police.
Yeah, of course.
And she does so by using this remote control hacking device that she has, where the police department parks their ship. She takes it over. She's like, hello, and then takes control of the ship like an RC car and flies around. She's like, because she's just a fucking kid, and it's delightful.
Well, she sort of shares this quality of Spike's, where does she know what she's doing? Like, does she understand how disruptive and how much danger she's in? Or I think so too. And so is she playing stupid a little bit? Right? Like
I
she
think
plays
she's
stupid.
Just doing what she wants because she can. I think that's.
I agree.
She's a wild horse. I think
she
doing what she wants.
I think she is actually in some ways an insight into Spike in that way.
Yeah,
you know?
I think there's kindred in some regard.
Yes,
but I think Ed is definitely unique.
100%.
She does what she wants because it entertains her, and the world is. She's still charismatic and has hope for the world. You know,
she's a
even
wild
though
child.
She's disruptive. She
Right.
isn't like, I'm doing this because nothing means anything. She's doing it because she's thrilled to do things. Just like she's like, Bebop, Bebop, I want to be on Bebop. That's just where she wants to go. So she's going to do whatever she can to take over, the crew, essentially. But in any case, she blows up the cops' car. Their zip craft.
They seem very helpless, by the way. The cops are extraordinarily helpless in this series.
Right. Yeah.
Like nothing happens to her because of that.
Nothing. Yeah. I mean, you can see why Jet kind of left the ISSP.
Oh, yeah. Like immediately.
They're kind of useless except for some isolated instances.
They always seem like tired bureaucrats in this show.
Right.
Exactly. They're basically exhausted bureaucrats. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Like just weary. Like their job sucks. Yeah.
We cut to the Bebop and it's landing in the water because they're about to start their investigation period. And Faye's going to look at the antenna where the hackers would have used and kind of look at that data. And Jet's going to find information and research hackers themselves on the ground because he's a detective.
Which is funny because it's very clear Faye thought that would be an easier job than it is, which is classic.
Well, I think it's important that Faye isn't interacting with humans because she hates that.
Yes, she does.
She hates people.
Well, it's funny. I also think like if Spike and Faye were doing this mission together, which normally they would, that thing that she's doing is what Jet would be doing.
Yes,
like that,
probably.
Like the walking around getting clues. That is what Faye does on almost all the missions that she and Spike do together.
Spike does that.
Spike consults
come
a
at it
fucking
differently.
Talking parrot or something and like learns the secrets.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what Spike does.
He would find a shaman that would pray his problem away. But the thing is that Spike would just, as he does, and in later episodes that we're going to talk about today, like he's just gonna things will just fall into his lap.
Yeah, he seems to like he's like a bloodhound, like who just sort of knows the scent. I'm on the scent and it leads me wherever. Anyway, I'm just pointing out they're both sort of out of sorts. Like,
right.
Anyway,
so Faye learns that she's like. There's a bunch of transmitters. There's a bunch of hackers, but she hears about Edward as like a main like, oh, he or she is really good because no one knows who Radical Edward is. And Jet learns kind of the same information in an awesome montage that I'm going to talk about later, where it's just a series of people direct to camera talking about, oh, it's got to be Edward. And Edward is this mythical figure who, is an 18-foot tall person, is a drag queen, is a yada, 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 just like a smorgasbord of things that, urban legends would ignite.
I want to talk about those portraits too. I'm glad you do because they're cool.
They're cool.
Yeah.
Edward basically hacks. We cut back to Edward. Edward hacks the server of the satellites and enters the virtual mind of the AI.
Yeah.
So Edward's already figured out what's going on here, and that there's no hacker involved. It's just a lonely AI. And she discovers that no one's hacked into this before, so she also knows and immediately has sympathy for this thing. And she hears this voice in the system. We get our first eye catch. And the satellite identifies itself as the central processing unit of the D-135 artificial satellite. And Edward is like, no, I'm going to call you MPU because Edward does what she wants.
Right.
And because it's like CPU, but cooler.
Well, and the satellite doesn't seem bummed about it.
No, Satellite's
okay.
happy to be having a conversation.
Agreed.
And now has a friend,
right?
Which Edward is pretty quick to be like, you're a friend now.
That's right.
Because she is adorable.
Yes.
So MPU explains that, I did those land carvings. And I was created on an older system, basically, it is inferred, before the gate explosion. So I don't know what's going on. I just know that, like, the thing I'm supposed to do is no longer happening, so I have no purpose, so I draw these things. And Edward asks, well, maybe I'll be your friend, and you can give me power I'll draw something, which we see at the end of the episode is her typical, like, emote face. So she does get to draw something on the Earth before they leave. But the Earth police jam the signal. So in the middle of their conversation, basically, the cord's ripped out. On the Bebop, Jet basically is telling Spike about basically everyone's like, okay, so it's Radical Edward. It's got to be this Radical Edward. That's what everyone's talking about. He brought home some souvenirs that he bought from a boy. And Jet turns basically...
They're like peeps, right?
Yeah, they're like peeps.
They're peeps, basically.
Basically.
I like that the kid who was selling it was sort of like, oh, you don't know about this? They're famous. And it's like, no, they're not. You little hustler.
They're not famous.
You little grifter. I loved it.
Yeah, always a grift.
Yeah.
I love that, like, that Earth, in the end, becomes a tourist attraction.
Yeah, of course.
And it's a tourist industry.
It's great.
That's really cool.
Flip the narrative around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun.
Because it's like you return to your home, I guess, or whatever. That's the only reason that anyone has money on Earth now. But basically, Jet finds on the computer that the police are also after Edward, so that might have a possible bounty. But just then, Edward basically hacks into the Bebop and has a video, phone call, basically. And they're like, oh, shit, this is live. We don't have capability to, like, have a conversation. So we get the sense that Edward is, like, lives up to the name, like, seriously good hacker.
Edward's hacking is magic and stays magic.
Is magic
for the whole series.
Yeah. Like, can just get into anything, which is great.
Yeah, it's
and
fun.
Totally makes sense for someone who's been isolated and living on a isolated planet and living alone.
And it makes sense.
But computers.
Well, and it makes sense for the way that we felt about computer technology in the 90s. Which is like, oh, young people understand computers instantly, and older people, like, it's really hard for them to learn it. You know what I mean? So, like, this is a very extrapolated concept.
So, what Edward's like, okay, let's broker a deal. You're going to owe me a favor, and I'm going to solve this bounty for you. And the way we're going to do it is you're going to fly to the satellite, download the satellite, get rid of, like, the antenna so no one can track what's going on, and then we'll have a copy of it, and then we'll give one copy to the police, and then you get your 8 million woolongs. And Faye's like, oh, that sounds so good. You're such a cute little kid.
Yeah, great.
Because the second that money's involved, and he's like, and that Ed's like, I don't want the money.
Right.
Like, I just want
oh, you're
a
great.
favor.
Yeah, sure.
And they don't know what the favor is yet, but they're like, sure, because they think that they're just going to ditch this kid. They don't care.
Faye thinks that.
Yes. Yeah, Faye's like, she's just a kid. What is she going to do? In any case. So that the mission begins, basically. They're like, all right. And oh yeah, Spike is now in because it's like, this is impossible. It's dangerous, I think is like what Jet says.
Yeah.
And then he goes, oh, word?
Yeah.
It's a death wish? Now
This
I'm
calls for
involved,
Spike.
baby. Yeah, exactly. So the Bebop goes and they're in a spacesuit. Spike is basically, his job is to fly, to destroy the antenna and fly close enough to connect the port and download the thing. Now, the problem is that there are a bunch of defensive satellites that exist that I think were put in place to destroy all of the asteroids or all of the debris flying from the moon.
So the spy program that became conscious is from a pre-moon explosion era, which I think sort of suggests there were Star Wars kinds of stuff going on.
Or there was, there's countries.
Like the Reagan-esque laser
probably.
grid became a thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a reference to the Star Wars program.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they have to deal with these other satellites that are going to fire at them at the behest of the main kind of intelligence. So Spike fires on the satellite, attempting to get rid of the antenna so he can approach kind of safely, but a satellite uses smart tactics. Like it's an artificial intelligence that is good enough that it can just sends another satellite to block the explosion. And now they're all awake. Now they're like, okay, we're going to, whatever Spike is, I'm going to destroy that. So now they're fucked basically. And so Faye kind of goes into action and she is in her zip craft and they're basically being fired at. Both of them are getting fired at when Edward suggests that Spike, if you fly really, really close, like 20 meters to MPU, the attack satellites won't fire in that vicinity, so you'll be safe. So just try to get there, and then maybe Faye can like fly around and take all of the brunt of the attacks from afar.
Edward puts Faye's safety in question.
Which
Edward's smart.
That's why I think Edward is super actually knows what's going on.
Very intuitive.
Because that's a maniacal plan that is very smart and quick. Like you're quick on your feet and also willing. You're like a general.
Yep.
You're willing to send people to their death
and knows which one to do it. You know, like that. Like no, I think Edward clocks Faye from 10 miles away.
From 10 miles away, yeah, it's so good. So yeah, Faye's acting as that decoy, and the plan works. Spike connects, downloads. And now we have a working copy of MPU. Back on Earth, Spike and Jet, which is the cutest, I think, that Jet and Spike ever look in the series when they're like trying to pitch over the music. They're trying to
that's
pitch.
funny.
Like, here's the disc.
Like they're batting their eyes.
We found the bounty, and they're both smiling. And the officer's like, what is this? This is not anything to me. This is a disc. I asked for a hacker because there is no hacker. And so, you know what that means is that life forms are bounties. Computers are not bounties. So they're not going to get paid once again.
Yeah, we find that out from the Shucks Howdy Bounty Hunters television show
a little bit later on Big Shot.
Big Shot.
And so that's another failure. So the crew is going to fly off and Edward calls them up and is like, hey, time to call in the favor. I'm going to become a member of your crew of Bebop. And Faye's like, just go. And none of that matters because once again, Edward is magic and in a very delightful ending to this episode, takes control of the Bebop and flies it once again like the RC car.
It's perfect.
And lands it right in front of herself because she's getting on board whether they like it or not. And Spike, it ends with Spike complaining about what are the three things that I told you, Jet, that I hate? Kids, animals, and women with attitudes. And we got all three nicely packaged together on this ship.
That's also...
And as they fly...
Go ahead. I was going to ruin your
As
thing.
they fly from Earth, we see on South America the face, Edward's,
drawn
iconic face that she
the
uses to
avatar.
hack.
Also,
end of episode.
That's where we learn Edward is a girl, which we did not know until Faye says it. Faye says, hey, you're a girl. Because they never acknowledge the possibility she's a girl until that moment.
Yeah.
And then they never really explore it again.
Yeah, they don't care.
No, they don't. No. But it's
great.
They clarify it for us at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
One point on that is Watanabe has mentioned in different interviews that she's possibly non-binary.
Sure.
In another
sure.
interview,
That makes sense.
He said she's an alien. Now,
okay. We're really going
these
for
are
it.
these are all things that Watanabe is known for, because he is a Fincher-esque, or at least a Coen Brothers-esque troll. Here's a quote from Watanabe that I love. For people who, and speaking generally of Bebop, for people who say it's a dream, I say it's not a dream. If they say it isn't a dream, I answer it's a dream.
Perfect.
So
he's a real Abe of a filmmaker.
I mean, I think it's the right answer.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's the right answer.
Yeah.
It's what you
Why
tell.
should he answer it? I agree.
Yeah.
Why should he give you that information?
Exactly. In any case, that is the end of this segment. What planet is this? We're going to move on to deconstruction, where my boy will be a little bit more present, and you'll stop hearing me yap in this second segment, where we talk about the execution, one cool execution thing that we each liked about this particular episode, typically direction or editing. And the segment's called Pushing the Sky.
God, I love those guitar stings.
God, they're
so good. Anyway, hi, this is Pushing the Sky. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Edward in the next segment, not as much here. Here, I want to talk on something very small, which is, how does the internet look in this show?
Yeah.
Right? Now,
cyberspace.
Now, I'm always interested in this because in the 90s, movies tried very hard to find ways to make the internet more exciting visually than it is.
Yeah,
right?
I'm looking at you, Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park.
A Unix system.
Right? Or like the best one is the net. I'm pretty sure we did a director piece on the net and like how silly the computer stuff is in the net.
Yes.
So I don't have a ton of stuff to say here other than the way they chose to render it is very Johnny Mnemonic, you know, like very early 90s. Like, and I think that's on purpose because everything that Ed touches is an archaic piece of junk that's been modified to look like or to work better than the tech they're all currently working with. Right. And everything on the Bebop is also sort of like retrofitted and like it's old and sort of decrepit, but been like modified to be the best it can be. Right. It's all very custom made. So it's not surprising to me that Edward's version of cyberspace, which by the way is VR. That's the first thing about it that I think is interesting. Edward operates in cyberspace in VR. To my knowledge, we don't see that much anywhere else. Basically, everybody else is like doing the
using
internet the way we normally consume it on a flat screen where they navigate between images with a keyboard, right? Edward exclusively as a hacker navigates the internet in a world where they're actually in cyberspace. It's a three-dimensional space, and they're sort of drifting in this seemingly chaotic way to the piece of internet they need to get to. Now, part of the reason that this is necessary, and it's necessary in 90s films all the time, is so that we get the feeling of what is the agency of this character doing something in the internet, right? We're not as concerned about that now in films and movies because we can just watch people type things out and we all share that experience, so we're not confused, right? Like we still cheat internet stuff all the time to show us like what the beat means. Like we'll get an image for something that wouldn't get an image or whatever. That happens all the time. But Bebop has the luxury of creating a world where this is actually possibly what internet looks like. So it works better than it would work in a lot of formats because it's retro sci-fi, like retro futurist sci-fi. So like in that sense, it's a bit of a film homage to films of its era, but also is a more believable literal place. Okay. Now, but what I love about it is Edward is able to, using VR, mostly without a keyboard, navigate cyberspace. And in some sense, that's the most prescient version of what we hope our internet experience will be from anything of that time. Like, we've been,
because it's the more tactile thing that 90s audiences understand.
We're still trying to achieve the version of internet that Edward is working with. Not necessarily the interface of it, but the idea of using eye motions and essentially like having a more interactive verbal experience. That is the version of the internet we're still sort of headed toward. Or if you believe Zuckerberg and people like that, right? So I think that Bebop, in part because they were trying to do film references, and in part because they didn't want the cumbersome typing stuff all the time that Edward has to do, found a way to give us a more dynamic visual experience of the internet that feels at once archaic in a funny way, so that gives us some attitude, and also happens to be a little prescient for what the internet may become in our lifetime.
Watanabe called emotes.
Yes,
like in fact, Watanabe,
the emotes, right?
Watanabe said of the emotes, like I think that would be something like street kids and street hackers, like of the future. Kids who are really good with computers probably would interact to the point that they'd have their own language. He was right about that. Yep. The other thing that's funny to tidbit or factoid is Watanabe did not use computers.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
Like previous to Bebop and for a long time after, like probably until the later 2000s is when Watanabe actually used a computer. So this is spoken from a man who understands the function and the utility of computers, but much to your point, is kind of approaching it in a more tactile, human way than most of us who are like immediately bought into the system and its quirks.
Like all the internet stuff in media up to this point, it's fundamentally about the cinema, not about its authenticity. And so, and that's why I mentioned Johnny Mnemonic or sort of anything of that time. Like, it's definitely aping that. Right. But I think it's modified in a way that's slightly more prescient and also sort of tucked away. Like, they don't make a big deal of it.
Yeah, you know? And that's super important.
I agree.
When you're doing a story.
Yes, they don't make a big deal of it.
It's not about the computer. Right. The computer is a tool.
Right.
You know?
And it has enough license to do it well without us being annoyed by it. And it just turns out to be a good decision artistically. That was my big thing, Abe.
Interesting enough, Watanabe's in this, and as we're going to, I think, see in Lazarus and in other works that he's done. Lazarus is, by the way, that's coming out soon. That's his new project. So if you're a fan of Bebop, the creator of Bebop is creating a new show. Oh my God.
Hey, I'll give it Lazarus. A watch. Why not?
Definitely. It looks awesome. And also it's choreographed. All the fights are choreographed by the choreographer of John Wick. So sounds awesome. The one that I wanted to talk about the most is that slice of life during the investigation period. So unrelated to theme, like an unrelated to theme feather in the cap of Bebop is the simple deconstruction of story beats into their simplest notions. Watanabe pulls this montage out in the middle, like when Jet's investigating. And it's during the time that another killer track by Yoko Kanno, The Egg and I, he builds a montage out of two types of shots. There's only two shots in the montage. There's a shot of like basically straight to camera person giving a testimonial after we assume he asked the question, tell me about Radical Edward. And so we just get that character in our face, and then it cuts to Jet's legs walking across the frame from right to left, meaning he's moving on. Here's another beat of, so it's just, what do I need out of this montage? What's the simplest kind of thing? So with the music, the pacing, the script, the background, settings, characters, like I'm already all in because they're killing it in all these other ways. And a series of these typically loud offers of a hodgepodge of people that Bebop does. We see a hippie, a Sikh, an old man who looks homeless, a Brooklyn woman who is in a storefront, a small boy selling souvenirs. They all talk straight to camera. And something I believe about filmmaking, about how shots play into each other, is that sometimes limitations are great things. We've heard many people talk about this, and I think most filmmakers will attest to
Everyone
this.
will say Jaws. Everyone will throw Jaws at you.
Jaws will, yeah. And some sequences, like, limitation is everything. It inspires everything, like this sequence. And I think the key is having so much in your toolkit at your disposal, meaning you can animate anything, you have the budget for anything, you have, access to whatever you need, and then creating an artificial limitation on that. To that kind of succession, that kind of progression of, like, in this case, a montage on purpose, seems to be the magic sauce, if ever there was one. I don't know why I personally am enthralled when I see these kinds of maneuvers.
It's the cinema language of it, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know why I'm interested in it, but as a director, like, the limitation forces deconstruction, I think, is the key. It says, like, all right, well, if I only have this, what do I still need to accomplish?
What's my language
it forces
to do it?
That thoughts. Yeah. And so how do I stay interesting? How do I look great, pace well? In other words, how do I feel right and propel the story forward? And this is as loud as, like, a long oneer, I would argue, this maneuver. It's like in your face. You're like, you can know nothing about film grammar or how to, like, articulate it, but you're like, oh, I noticed they're doing a thing here, and still it feels unassuming to me. It feels
not
like
loud.
Oh, it's just the facts, baby. Just the facts, baby. But he pulls it off. It's just a wonderful, nice little touch. Super efficient. I spoke about it way longer than the sequence actually.
No,
so
I loved it. The postcards remind me a lot of stuff from Spike Lee's movies. You know what I mean? Like, he does those sort of direct-to-camera postcard types of shots. Yep. I think
He Got Game. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. He does do it in He Got Game. He does a little bit in Do the Right Thing. He does it a little bit. Is it 24 Hours? What's the name of that movie where they have all those racist rants? You know what I mean?
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's with Edward Norton, and it's like every like ethnic group in the borough argues why the other one sucks. It's fascinating. Anyway, it's racist. I'm not advocating it. But it's very memorable filmmaking, I think, is maybe the way to say it. So there's also Abe and I both took a class that we often draw commentary from, and also I don't know about you, it really influenced my filmmaking a lot. It was at USC. It was called Visual Expressions.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it was awesome. Great class. It was taught by this guy named Bruce Block, who has a book out there. If you're like
called The Visual Story.
Yes, if you're a real nerd about film, like, it's one of the great texts on it.
It's what you think film school is.
Yes, it is, and that's why it was so cool.
Film school is not what film school is.
No, film school is. That's right. Abe is right.
This is like how do you train the eye to look at a thing versus how to
and
not
what are
look
the
at a thing?
elements of an image that create meaning and can be used to create meaning? Like, which sounds very philosophical. It's not. It's very practical. It was a great class for that. And I think when I watch Cowboy Bebop, I see a person who's, like, mastered the elements of that class. Like, the basic, 100%. How do I use the frame to tell a story? Anyway, I'm just calling it because the thing you said reminded me a lot of that class in the best way.
No, totally. It's so fantastic. Wanabe's a master. Okay, cool. So we both kind of oozed our ooze out at Bebop.
I'm oozeless now.
I'm oozeless. So let's go to our final segment where we talk about themes and symbology, or symbolism rather, not symbology. That would be talking about the symbols. We're talking about what the symbols mean.
That's right. Bone dry.
You're gonna carry that. You're gonna carry that weight.
Bone dry without any ooze. It's so much friction in this conversation going forward.
It's heating up, baby. It's what happens when bones rub up against each other.
Only good things. That's all I know. Anyway. Okay. To me, in part because we don't have to go that long here, I just want to restrict this conversation like, why Edward? Right? Why Edward? Because I feel like if you've been into the show at this point, never seen it before, it has to feel like a swerve that we included this character. Why Edward? What's the advantage of Edward from the narrative? Not that Edward is bad, but definitely Edward's disruptive to what the tone of the show has been up to this point. Right? And at least I remember my first watch, I was like, what? Why? Huh? What? Yeah. Huh? So why Edward? Okay, so I want to point out a few things that stood out to me as I was watching it this time about Edward. The first is that Edward shares the same exact life frame that everyone on Bebop has, which is alone, needing other people, right? Like living a life that's not functional, right? Alone, very talented, under-challenged, right? Needs some way to escape their current situation. Right. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of things about Edward that at first are sort of like goofy, but then you realize actually tell us a lot about why she belongs on the Bebop. The first one is Edward types with her toes, a thing that goes on all the time in the show. And I always thought it was very silly, which it is. But like what you really realize is Edward is much, much, much more talented than almost anybody her age. Mm-hmm. Right. And that Edward's actually very under-challenged to the point where Edward has to make things harder for herself to get excited about doing something, right? And so that is all these characters. Every one of them has this to some degree, but Spike has it the most.
Spike has the death wish, yeah.
Yeah, well, Spike only gets excited if it's impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Because Spike always wants to test what's the thing that can kill me, essentially, right? And Edward shares that quality with Spike.
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, maybe not thinking about the consequences is a better way of saying it, but yeah.
Yeah. So this is what I came to when I asked why Edward, and I was writing things down. The first thing is Edward is a different expression of loneliness we don't have from any of these other characters, right? They're all lonely, deeply lonely. Edward is lonely in a way that only a child can be lonely, which is abandoned and not able to articulate it. And so, but everything she does comes from that loneliness. Yes. Making friends with a robot, right? With AI. Her hacking is a way of like getting to know somebody, right? Like she has to intrude on somebody's space in order to get to know them, right? That's why she's a hacker. Also, hacking in general is a thing that made more sense to be a young person's gig and is necessary for bounty hunters. So that part makes sense too, right? Mm-hmm. Edward adds jokes. And True. We need and Cowboy Bebop wants to do jokes. Yeah, Cowboy Bebop wants to do jokes, and Edward adds jokes. Often that's what Edward does in the episode.
Yeah,
right. Is here's a joke. And the last thing is Edward shows us the human cost and the human experience of a child. We don't have a lot of children in this world.
That's it. Yeah.
Right. And Edward, despite how gifted and weird they are, is a child, and we need that. Because it changes how these people are able to act. It constrains them in sort of a way, like it humanizes them in a way.
Right.
Right? Because they recognize they were also this child once.
Yes. Forces them to be human. Yes. To think about being a child.
That's correct. Because 100%. The way Edward acts is the way a child would act if they were this smart and capable. Right. So anyway.
Functionally, no, you're exactly right about it. I love the idea that her first arc is feeling sympathy for a lonely computer. Mm-hmm. It almost is perfectly like a reflection of her,
and a reflection of Bebop. Like she understands Bebop.
Yeah. Because they're a mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam.
They're lonely people that need to make a mark on the world, and they can't.
I think the only thing that I would add to your exactly right definition of why Edward is that if we look at everyone else, as her elder, obviously,
right,
they're in their third act. They've lived a life.
That's right.
And they haven't rebooted yet. They haven't lifted on because the whole idea of Cowboy Bebop is a liminal space. It's a transition from it's a metamorphosis for a lot of people. And then sometimes it's tragic. And in Ed's case, it's not, because she's a child and she's yet to live her life. She's just formed, and it's like, what's your first move? And her first move is kind of the bebop. But it forces the others, like you pointed out, to go like, I regret what I did, who I am. That's why I am lonely. That's why I'm sad. That's why I wish it wasn't this way. I don't want that for this child.
Right.
So
I don't want to create that.
It humanizes me because now I have something to save. Before, no one had anything to save other than themselves and, the idea of tomorrow and the next score. Ed is something that actually represents stakes for these people. Yeah. That's why she exists on the Bebop.
It rarely gets directly pointed at, but it infuses things all the time. Right, like, and one of the best relationships in this show that is barely explored, but like every time it is,
Spike
it's awesome.
And Edward.
Well, yes, but I was going to say Faye and Edward, because Faye passes on such awful things to Edward.
Yes,
and then you kind of get the little sense Faye's like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? Like
a little bit, like Faye's like, maybe I'm a little bit of a nihilist.
Yeah, a bit of an asshole.
I hate everything a little bit.
Yeah, and Edward really exposes that in Faye.
I love the reluctance because it coaxes Spike out of his, I'm going to be cool and, almost mystically cryptic
and aloof
most of the time, and aloof. That's how I want to be. I can be that way with Jet and Faye, and it's my protective, it's my armor. He is completely undone when he cannot deal. That's why he hates children. He can't deal with children and dogs and women who have attitude, because he is super intuitive and he understands immediately what's going on. That's who Spike is. I mean, that's not to laud Spike, but like, it's so funny to me that like everyone's like, why did the AI make art? Like, what's the deal with that? He nails it on the open volley. Right. He's like, it was lonely, so drew some friends. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
And he has the same intuitiveness about Ed, because he knows who Ed is. He intuits it because he's very good at that, and that forces him to ask a question of like, can you save yourself?
Right.
If you can save a child, you can save yourself. Surely.
Are you willing
to? And that's
to?
Not a question he wants to answer.
Ed also not accidentally looks a lot like Spike. Like just like body and hair and all that. Like Edward is sort of a cute, childish version of Spike.
Yeah.
In some ways, and that's not accidental. So this watch.
She kind of moves around like water. She's like kicking around. Yeah.
Yeah. But in a more sort of wild, childish way.
Right.
Like I'm going to be watching for the ways the show parallels them this time, because I've never done that before. When I watched it. And I'm excited because I bet that will pay off.
I can think of several moments that we're going to be faced with. But that's the end of this episode.
It is.
So we'll maneuver that space once we get there. But for now, you have to go listen to something else, because this episode is over. Thank you for listening.
We love you guys. Thanks so much.
Remember to support Small Beans, patreon.com/smallbeans.
You guys are the children in our spaceship.
We love you.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I don't have anything else. We'll be hitting you next month or so. Next 3 weeks. I don't know how often we put this out. Every 2 to 4 weeks.
Even though it's your choice. You're like water.
Hey, we got a lot of things
schedule.
we have to release.
Yeah.
We got a lot of podcasts. And we'll be going over the first full Jet episode, Ganymede Elegy, number 10.
Yeah.
See you then.